And
Hello,
on
Dave.
the January the 20th, Mike Pompeo was interviewed by the Newsmax TV, and he said, quote, "Hope U.S. stays tough on China." Do you think Biden's new administration will stick to it? Thank you.
Only, it's a great question. Only if they're forced to stick to it. Remember, their natural inclination is appeasement. Let's go back in time. Biden was in charge of the pivot to Asia under President Obama. The pivot to Asia was supposed to be strategically to shift out of the Middle East, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and start to confront our quote-unquote strategic partner, which was the Chinese Communist Party or China, and particularly as they try to consolidate the Eurasian landmass. And the hot spots would be obviously the border of India and China, but more importantly, the South China Sea and the Straits of Taiwan and Taiwan itself, and the littoral nations around the South China Sea. That would be for the kinetic part of this. But also is beginning to awareness of this economic and information warfare as the Chinese Communist Party performs unrestricted warfare across a wide scope of the battlefield. And Joe Biden was in charge of that, and he completely blew it. You had a increased militarization of the South China Sea. You had an increase in cyber intrusions into American corporations and the theft of intellectual property. This all happened under Obama's watch, of which Biden was in charge of. So in this administration, if you heard, it's the same cast of characters as Tony Blinken, as Jake Sullivan. It's these same weak-willed, very appeasement-oriented foreign policy experts that essentially kowtow to the Chinese Communist Party. And so what our mission is to make sure that by exposing the truth and exposing what the reality is, we awaken the American people even more, and they are forced, this administration is forced to take dramatic action. Let's go back and be very specific. President Xi gives this speech at Davos the other day, which is essentially either a victory speech or a throwdown. You can take your pick about they're going to drive the agenda for the world, right? And this agenda is going to be off the totalitarian, authoritarian, state capitalist model that essentially enslaves the Chinese people and makes the rest of the workers in the world serfs because of the enslavement of the Chinese people and the unfair labor practices that the Chinese Communist Party impose upon Lao Beijing. And so, and what was Biden's response? There hasn't been a response. You know, Jen Psaki, this kind of hapless press secretary that's up there, is talking about strategic patience and interagency process and all this mumbo jumbo, right? All this bureaucratic speak, in which they have not come back, and they have not had a response yet to President Xi's speech. This is only being viewed in Beijing as weakness and confusion and not understanding what the plot is. And if you can see the throughput of President Trump, and particularly the muscular confrontation that we had with the Chinese Communist Party to really put them on notice that you're not going to be able to you're not going to run the world like you run China, right? You're not going to enslave the world like you've already enslaved the Chinese people. In fact, the story of the first half of the 21st century is the quest for freedom of the Chinese people against the Chinese Communist Party.
The PLA aircrafts, including the jet fighters and bombers, including Taiwan Air Defense and Identity Zone for the consecutive days. Meanwhile, the U.S. sent the Roosevelt carrier fleet to Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. Personally, how likely will there be a kinetic war on Taiwan, and what will be the Biden administration's response? Thanks, Bannon.
Listen, this is another testing you're seeing from the Chinese Communist Party immediately. The air flights, the unauthorized and illegal air flights over Taiwan is to intimidate the Taiwanese people and intimidate the United States. This whole issue about this carrier battle group, strike battle groups in the South China Sea is another issue of intimidation. The South China Sea is absolutely essential to world trade and world peace. That's why, you know, what, almost 50 years ago, or 45 years ago, I was a young naval officer on a destroyer in a carrier battle group. Guess where? In the South China Sea, patrolling the South China Sea back in the mid-70s. Why was that? Because that waterway is absolutely essential to the peace and prosperity of all of Asia and therefore the world. And so it's essential that that waterway be absolutely free for navigation. And the Chinese Communist Party considers that an inland sea of China. This is just not acceptable. The Biden administration is being tested and probed every day by the Chinese Communist Party, and so far they're showing weakness and fecklessness. There hasn't been any response so far about the flights over Taiwan, and quite frankly, they're trying to intimidate them about this carry battle group. What I would do with the carry battle group is steam the carry battle group right through the Taiwan Straits to make sure that the Chinese Communist Party understood that the Taiwan Straits are also free and open for navigation for every ship, every vessel in the world, for peace and prosperity. Look, the Chinese Communist Party is trying to consolidate the Eurasian landmass with their allies in North Korea, or their vassal state of North Korea, but also their allies in Iran, Turkey, and Russia, and Pakistan. Those nations are working essentially in unison to try to, as an axis, to try to consolidate the Eurasian landmass. And with that, to cause nothing but trouble, because they're all essentially totalitarian dictatorships, okay, or authoritarian dictatorships. That is the central problem the world has today, with the Chinese Communist Party being the leader in that. As they put their influence into Europe, they put their influence in the United States further and further. It has to be confronted. People want to look the other way because people want peace and prosperity. They don't want to have to confront this evil. And that's why your network is so important. That's why, Dr. Ming, your show is so important. It's why all the great contributors you have to ask these great questions every week to me are so important. You're at the vanguard of a democracy movement, a rule of law movement, a movement to free Lao Beijing, to free the Chinese people from this totalitarian dictatorship. The world will not have peace and prosperity until the Chinese people are free. Once the Chinese people are free, we will begin the process of moving towards the sunlit uplands that are ahead of us. But it won't happen. It will not happen a day before the Chinese people are free and they have the rule of law, they have democracy, they have self-determination.
My question is, on the 21st of January, the European Parliament passed a resolution about the CCP crackdown of the Hong Kong pro-democracy movement. How will this resolution affect the Euro and China comprehensive agreement on investment?
Look, I see all the proclamations, but I don't see the actions. I think this whole deal about this investment, and particularly led by the Germans, is very, very disturbing. What you don't want to have is a CCP. Basically, their investments influence peddling to turn politicians. I think the single biggest thing, the West has failed Hong Kong and has failed itself in not stepping up to the CCP and not sanctioning people. Look, I've been sanctioned by the CCP. Why have we not sanctioned Wan Shan? Why have we not sanctioned Xi and their families? Why has the West not done that? I think the most important thing to watch for right now for your audience is to see what's happening in Great Britain and the United Kingdom. I think they've offered 5 million passports or 5 million citizenships to the Hong Kong people to come to the United Kingdom. So I think you're seeing a lot of proclamations. I want to see more action. And the only way they're going to take more action is shows like yourselves. The more this information gets out, particularly the insidious nature of the Chinese Communist Party and the insidious nature of how that comes with capital investment. Once they start putting money to work, they're essentially buying politicians. They're buying influence. They're buying media. That's why your show and GTV and G News throughout the world and others are so vitally important to get the word out. The more we get that word out, you're going to see a sea change among people saying, hey, why are we having the Chinese Communist Party in our country? Why are we having them, build infrastructure? Why are we having Huawei on the telephone and internet system? And just what politicians have turned into running dogs for the Chinese Communist Party.